Mini episode 1482 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode 1482. This is FDH managing partner Rick Morris here with one of our favorite FDH Lounge dignitaries, my good pal Jake Digman, and we are coming at you today. We teased doing this segment a while back, the last time we were doing some WWE analysis. A little bit of state of AEW as far as where they're headed going into the summer of 2022. A very critical summer, a very critical stretch ahead, which we'll be covering. And then we'll also take a look at the first event of the summer here, the upcoming Double or Nothing pay-per-view. It will be the fourth one in the history of AEW already. Doesn't hardly seem possible, but we are at that point, and it's back in Las Vegas where it all began in 2019. So who better to talk about the best pro wrestling on the planet today with than my good pal Jake Digman? Couldn't think of anybody better. Glad to have you on, buddy.
I'm glad to be on with you, Rick. And so this isn't going to be our usual burial fest, huh? We're going to do something fresh and different. I like it.
Yes. We buried WWE a lot on there, but having said that, there were some things I think that we pointed out that were positive. I mean, certainly the way that they brought Cody in when we did the WrestleMania breakdown, there were some things. And so I think this is going to be largely the same because I do have a few points of constructive criticism to make. And they're more so, I guess, on the business side, because creatively, I think it's pretty strong all the way around. I say pretty strong at this point when I would normally say hugely strong. I mean, this is a season when it may not be necessarily as great as it was, say, heading into last year at All Out or sometimes like this. Anybody's going to have ebbs and flows. But from a business perspective, I do have some thoughts here on what I'd like to see them do to kind of tighten it up. So it's not going to be necessarily 100% roses coming from me, but obviously I come from a place of believing that it's a great product, and my criticisms are constructive where they are, and I think they're relatively mild because, like any fan of AEW, I want to see it stick around, I want to see it thrive, I want to see the next TV contract be even stronger than this one so that they can keep building and retaining stars and keep giving us the great things that they have been, Jake.
I agree with you, Rick, and let's dive into this and let's take a look at the state of AEW, All Elite Wrestling, as it is right now. And the other thing that's interesting, if somebody would have told you 5 years ago that there was going to be professional wrestling back on the old Turner networks, you never would have believed it, right?
It's incredible. It really kind of is incredible, and that it ended up there of all places. But in the same token, though, by the same token, it's one of these things where if it was going to pop up anywhere, with the way that the TV conglomerates are today, right? I mean, it's all a bunch of corporate families out there. You've got the Turner Networks families, you've got the ones under the Paramount banner, you've got the ones under the NBC Universal banner, and so it becomes process of elimination. When you see where WWE has their connections with the different networks, and they don't have an official connection with ESPN, but I think ESPN and Disney, they're not necessarily keen to go into competition with WWE. They probably learned their lesson with AWA and World Class back in the day. So, I mean, by process of elimination, Jake, when you start thinking about it, as weird as it sounds to think that we've come full circle from the beginning of the 21st century to where we are 20 plus years later, there aren't that many places for wrestling to end up these days. The more things change, the more they stay the same as far as the number of places being relatively constant that could pay for programming like that.
Yeah, you're right. You're right about that. I mean, if we look over the course of really the past 30 years, the only real network homes that we had, minus a brief flirting with TNA when they were on Fox Sports Net, but that was a case where TNA was actually paid. It was essentially paid programming on Fox Sports. Other other than that, I mean, we've had pretty much the same major players, that being the TNT TBS, of course, USA, which is now under the NBC Universal, and then for that brief period in the mid to late 2000s, we had what was then known as Spike TV. I don't even know what it's. I think it's Paramount Network now.
Paramount,
I do believe.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but it's one of those situations where whatever is old is new again. Oh, and of course there is Ring of Honor on all of the networks that Sinclair owned. But that might be able to tie into this conversation about AEW as well, because who knows moving forward what the future of that Tony Khan now owned brand is going to be as far as television clearances and whatnot. And you never know. Maybe one day we could see some ROH specials going on TBS or TNT. You just never know.
You never know. And you know what? I'd like to start there. That's a good place. Let's start with the ROH stuff, because I think everything will be a logical flow once we get back into the quote-unquote pure AEW stuff. That they're at a point in time now where Tony Khan has kind of hinted that he's had some discussions with Warner Media about finding a home for the programming here. And again, I say this not just as somebody who is currently subscribed to HBO Max, but I mean, I think that would be, so again, it's in my best interest. I think that would be a great place, not only for the ROH library and the AEW library, but for a weekly ROH show. I think it would make a lot of sense if they could do that, but Tony Khan's got to find a place for a weekly show. Some people have suggested, at least in the near term, do it on YouTube. I don't think so, because, again, it's going to be kind of tough to monetize that, and rightly or wrongly, there's a certain kind of feel to it as far as not being as big time, and I think that's kind of unfair, the way that some people can be snobby, but perception can be reality. You want it to come across as a big league product. What I would do, quite frankly, I'd lop off AEW Dark or Dark Elevation. I think you've only got room for 4 shows a week, even if one of them is sort of purely dedicated to ROH, and I hope that Tony Khan accepts some booking help, because as I understand it, him and his dad's team in the Premier, they're back in the Premier League in England this year. I guess relegation, they're going up the ladder this time, so that's going to take up more of his time. I have a list of guys that I'd like to see, and gals, moved over to ROH out of AEW, but before we get to that, I want to get your thoughts on some of the things I've said already, and also any thoughts on Tony Khan maybe putting together, whether it's a booking committee, whatever the heck it's going to be, but people to really help him with all of the details of these kinds of things, because the guy basically has like 4 full-time jobs as it is right now.
Yeah, there's only so many hours in a day, and only so much time that you can that one can allocate with those hours in the day. Being already with a full-time job running AEW, and then also running. You mentioned the Premier League is the football, as is known in everywhere else but the States.
Yep.
And then, also, he has his hand in the Jacksonville Jaguars organization with his father as well. So, and now you add on Ring of Honor with that. I 100% agree that he should take on some help and be willing. And there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I need some backup, I need some help on this. I feel that as far as the ROH portion of the conversation, I feel like he has done a very good job in trying to maintain what was the feel of ROH by bringing in, Bobby Cruz to ring announce the matches, to give it some kind of specialness that's a little different from your regular AEW matches. So it's not just, hey, here's the unfortunate side effect of when they did the WWE or WWF at the time, had WCW come in. It was like, they did one shot and was like, with 2 announcers who were never a broadcast team on WCW programming, and flopped miserably. I like that Tony Khan has taken the approach of, trying to, even within the little piece of pie right there, a niche, within the AEW, I hate to use this term, but universe. Within that whole little world right there, it's like he's letting, so far, the things that make Ring of Honor be Ring of Honor. And I think moving forward, I agree with you that I love the idea of an HBO Max, especially that being a Warner Brothers subsidiary already, to go in there and add, just look at the library with AEW and now Ring of Honor, all the backlog of footage they could be putting up that would entice wrestling fans to want to come in and watch that, and plus it'll give a sufficient outlet, hopefully, easily to be able to purchase their pay-per-views moving forward, because it's like all over the board. Is a traditional pay-per-view fight, the fight app in some areas, Bleacher Report in other areas. It would be nice to be able to say, hey, go here to watch this product and said other product as well. And I absolutely look forward to what the future holds for both AEW and Ring of Honor. But yeah, there's no shame in saying he needs some help. And you know what? I wouldn't be opposed if he brought in Hunter Johnson, aka Delirious, and let him pick up right where he left off, because no one knows more about that product than he does.
I agree, and here I want to make a point about ROH. I want to kind of build off of something that you said there, because there's a thing. Meltzer said a while back, and as smart as he is, nobody knows more about the business than him, but I didn't agree with this, of where he felt like for imaging purposes, maybe just fold the ROH stuff in. I didn't think so, because I think having a second brand, if you can do it in a way where it doesn't feel secondary or developmental, that is a good thing, because ROH has, at least among the hardcores, a very distinct identity. Now, the thing of it is it will be, and it should be, used as at least partially a developmental system for guys. It's going to be a good place for guys to get reps before coming over to AEW. It'll be sort of a promotion from a lot of the guys who've been on YouTube. And like I said, I have specific thoughts on guys I want to see move there. But what I think is good with ROH and the way that it is where they've emphasized when it's been on TV, like you said, Bobby Cruz has been out there doing the announcing. They emphasized the role of the handshakes before and afterwards. The fact that they still have a pure champion now in Wheeler Yuta. It's going to be interesting. I assume he's going to be going back and forth between the two. I don't want to see that with too many guys, but I don't have a problem with them doing it with Wheeler Yuta, because they're clearly grooming him to be a very, very big thing. But what's good about it is ROH has an identity that is a little bit different than just about any other wrestling promotion out there. And I think it's a way where it helps, hopefully, as they go along, it'll help stop it from feeling secondary. Even though, let's face it, between the two promotions, it's going to be. But again, whether it be having a pure title, the handshakes, all the different things about it, it could be presented as, maybe you look at it like AEW is the best of pro wrestling and ROH is the best of niche pro wrestling. Something to basically make it seem like the best of something and not secondary to, the major promotion that it's affiliated with.
I agree with that, and that's also the reason why it would need to find a major home as far as broadcasting and not go on YouTube, because as you said earlier, just to reiterate that, if they just put it on YouTube and that's their main show for ROH, it'll just come across as less than, and then you don't want anything like that in the minds of the fans, because then you're going to push away the hardcore ROH fans that have been there from the beginning of it, and then it's also going to have your new fans that come in and look at it and go, well, why do I have to watch this?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I really think that, again, it's an opportunity where, you have some established talents in there. Jonathan Gresham being the champion is excellent. I think he fits that product better than AEW, although I think, again, at his size, it wouldn't be the detriment being in AEW that it would be in WWE. So down the line, once he's done being world champion, I could see him moving over to AEW. But a mixture of established guys like that, anybody that they sign from ROH that is currently a free agent should be in ROH, like Dalton Castle. If he gets signed, put him in ROH. I'd like to see all of that for continuity purposes. Plus, you have some veterans in there to work with the young guys. Here's the list of people I'd like to see moved over there. I would send over Lee Moriarty, Lee Johnson, Brock Don't Call Me Glock Anderson. I would send over the Varsity Blondes, Butcher Blade, and Bunny, and then Angelico, as well as Private Party. I just send the whole family office, whatever we're calling it now, Hardy family office, Andrade family office, whatever. I think that they could be better utilized in a promotion like that. I'd send House of Black over, as controversial as that is. I think they're having trouble fitting on AEW right now, and I think maybe a good dominant run in ROH could kind of help retool them. I'd send over Aaron Solo and Nick Camarado, and I would send Nick Nemeth over there. And I think Nemeth is somebody who could have a pretty bright future, but I'm not seeing much of a present for him on the AEW landscape. And I guess that's the whole common denominator of a lot of these guys here. Not all of them, like House of Black is not being used as jobbers to the stars, but basically the way that it's been working is the younger guys, as they work their way up, are basically jobbers to the stars. They get their wins on YouTube and everything like that for the most part. And I think that sort of emerging middle class, I think that they are ready to be the anchor of ROH with the accoutrements of, a Jonathan Gresham and whoever else gets signed on more of a veteran level to come over there. So that's basically my vision for how I'd like to see the talent apportioned.
I agree with you, but I also feel that you need to have some kind of established names, because right now it just comes across to me personally, it just sounds like more of what you said earlier, it sounds a lot like a developmental territory, which I guess, that is the idea of what you want to go with, but you also need some kind of an anchor that's there, even if, and this is the beauty of this, they could go back and forth. You could have a revolving door of a veteran anchor. You could bring in anybody with the ties to Ring of Honor could come in there with, names from a Samoa Joe to a Jay Lethal to a Bryan Danielson to a CM Punk. If you're trying to, establish this brand, and especially let's say, okay, you never know who's going to, the forbidden door. You never know who's going to, it wouldn't even be a forbidden door, it would just be the revolving door. And it would, especially for those hardcore, diehard ROH fans, to see a lot of those names that they've seen throughout the years. I mean, let's just say, throw it out there. You want to do a Ring of Honor pay-per-view, right? It's exclusively under that umbrella. You put Samoa Joe versus CM Punk on there one last time and advertise it as that, like their final battle. Wow, that's interesting. The final battle of Joe and Punk, and then you have, that is your at the top there, and even if you want to do a Danielson challenging Jonathan Gresham, and then use the rest of the card to give these underutilized guys opportunity to learn, because that is one of the unfortunate drawbacks. And we said we would acknowledge the criticism of AEW. A lot of these guys don't really get a lot of time to get reps in and work because they're not doing, they're sure they pick up indie dates here and there, but how many of them are actually doing that? How often do you see a Varsity Blondes, performing, going and competing on an indie show over the weekend? Dr. Britt Baker was just in Akron, Ohio, miles down the road from me Saturday night. Doing a favor for some old friends down there at the AEW show in the Northeast Ohio area. But, for the most part, these guys work once a week. And if they're not on the show, or they're just wrestling, on limited to the dark and the dark elevation shows, it's, how many, you got to constantly be working and getting reps in order to get better, or else you're just going to stay stagnant, in my opinion. So hopefully this will give an opportunity, and eventually, as growth and development comes with both the ROH brand and even the AEW brand for that matter, hopefully one day they'll grow to the point where they will include house shows or live events for people to go out and go see, and it'll give these guys more and more work, because if you we've heard from every veteran in the wrestling business, television is not where you want to get your growing pains. You need to have the opportunity to expand your repertoire and connect with an audience without those cameras there, so you can try it on TV. But unfortunately, just in the nature of the wrestling business in 2022, television is their only opportunity to learn and grow. So I would like to see that expand and give these guys some more opportunities, and creating something like how ROH used to be. I'm not saying it goes all the way back to like strictly DVD, but to have their events be a big time event, like have an ROH event on a Saturday night like they used to do back in the day when they'd come through town, and every single show they did, although granted it was just a glorified house show, but every one of them felt like a big deal because that was their only means of which doing shows.
Yes, and we talked about this previously, that AEW, that their TV actually in many ways sort of mimics the whole indie super show model. And that's a very good example of it right there, what you're talking about, how ROH used to run. There's talk about them potentially running quarterly pay-per-views, maybe the same weekends as AEW pay-per-views. I think Tony Khan was asked about that, said that he found it intriguing. And what I think could help both promotions, like you said, in terms of getting enough star power on the ROH shows and helping avoid congestion on AEW pay-per-views where you're desperately trying to fit everybody in. And if you don't have a casino battle royale or something like that, then you could be looking at circumstances like this week where I guess FTW and Darby Allin, as of right now, are not scheduled to be on Double or Nothing, which is kind of incredible. So maybe one or two AEW guys moving over to ROH, maybe like for the stretch from one pay-per-view to the next. Either you build up a program there, or like you said, maybe Danielson in a title chase against Gresham, something like that. But I think you could kill two birds with one stone as far as not having AEW be stretched too thin and getting enough star power on the ROH shows to be able to complement having the younger guys develop.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it'll give an opportunity for people to work with veterans who know what they're doing, and give the younger guys a chance to hold their craft. And most importantly, it'll help develop more stars, because at the end of the day, that's all these guys that are coming in now aren't getting any younger. Your Punks, your Joes, your Danielsons, your Kenny Omegas. So that at some point, AEW is going to have to develop their next crop of stars, and they've done a fairly good job of like MJF, the first one that pops up. I'm pretty sure he does for you as well.
Right.
As far as one of the best homegrown stars, I mentioned Dr. Britt Baker earlier. It's another great homegrown star. There's a couple that I feel they've dropped the ball on that could have done something, but like Jungle Boy, for example, I think they've despite the fact that he's been the reigning half of their world tag team champions, I just for some reason I just feel like there's something missed in there, and they could be doing more with him. There's Sammy Guevara is one of those ones, like when he was in the inner circle, it's kind of like a flip flop. I think his booking has been questionable, but they've also done a great job with various other guys. I mean, you mentioned the was it Private Party?
Yes.
That could probably they came in with a lot of like a house of fire, and then they tampered off, and they were victims of what I think is one of these situations where, and as I say, follow the talent, where there's only so much time on a broadcast,
right?
So they're just trying to get everybody in as much as possible. So another great example is all of the Dark Order. For the past 2 years, pretty much all they've done is just, once in a while you'll get like a John Silver match, or they'll have a match, but they've been used as basically jobbers to the stars. And then for the most part, it's just been, like, I cannot tell you, I think I've seen Colt Cabana wrestle one match in 2 years.
Right.
Just think off the top of my head. And that's another guy that would be a great example for someone to send over to ROH. He's got ties with the company, and I mean, freshen him up a little bit, maybe do a heel run with them, how he's, whatever you want to do, but, again, the possibilities are endless.
No, they really, really are. And, as we take kind of a wider look here at where AEW's at right now, I mentioned they've got a big run coming up this summer. Of course, as we talked about, we are on the doorstep of Double or Nothing. From there, a month later, Forbidden Door. We'll talk a little bit about that, the joint pay-per-view with New Japan Pro Wrestling, which should be awesome. I'm guessing this is going to be in July, probably the next Battle of the Belts special. And they've been moving towards kind of a championship week format with that. It's interesting that the last 2 times they've done Battle of the Belts, it sort of felt like a second hour of Rampage. But the whole week has been loaded up with title matches. So every time they do it, it seems to be like a week-long kind of a deal. I'm guessing that the one that they do in the fall is probably going to be the week of Arthur Ashe, because that would make sense, right? Do a 4th hour from Arthur Ashe. That would be pretty incredible. But in between that period of time, you're going to have All Out in early September. So it's a very big run that they are starting right now. The big run last summer, the last time we did a real big breakdown of AEW, they had the first Rampage coming up. From there, the first Dance, the debut of CM Punk at the United Center, which was the biggest open secret out there. Double or Nothing also in Chicago, Grand Slam at Arthur Ashe, Dynamite, and Rampage. And of course, at Double or Nothing, the debuts of Bryan Danielson, Adam Cole, and Ruby Soho, all of which were being strongly rumored at that time to happen at about that time. And we said that it was going to be incumbent on AEW to crush it, and if possible, to surpass the sky-high expectations. I feel like on many levels they did. I feel like we all kind of came out of it afterwards. Most of us that were watching this going, wow, expectations were sky high, and if anything, they might have surpassed it. And one of the things is that, again, there's a lot of, you can't throw a dead rat on Twitter without hitting a bad faith critic of AEW, unfortunately. And what a lot of them are pointing to is the fact that there hasn't been an appreciable change in business over the last year. The very excellent WrestleNomics site goes through and catalogs this, as does Dave Meltzer, of course. And in terms of ratings, in terms of the specific subsector of the ratings as far as the 18 to 49 demographic, going through this, I mean, they are doing somewhat better than they were a year ago. And even when they're down, it's only because of extreme competition like basketball and hockey playoffs, etc. But they're not where they were. We would have thought going into that last year maybe that kind of a critical success, rating success at the time would have led to more of a sharp uptick up. I think I might have expected that at the time. And it hasn't materialized yet, and not to say that it won't, but like I said, any of the constructive criticism that I have that I'm going to give in this segment stems from, I want to see them be able to take that step, Jake Digman. I'm not 100% sure as to why it hasn't happened and why there hasn't been more growth in the period of time since then. They've been doing okay. At least they haven't gone backwards. But I think we'd all like to see more growth from them because it's going to be very instrumental in getting the next TV deal, especially in the wake of the merger with Warner Media and Discovery. A lot of us still have post-traumatic stress syndrome from the last time the Turner networks went through something like this and they had wrestling when AOL Time Warner decided they didn't want wrestling back in '01. I don't think we're at risk of that happening again, but they got to keep putting their best foot forward business-wise. We all want to see it, those of us who love the promotion.
Couple things. Number one, to this day, I still have a disdain for Jamie Kellner.
Screw him.
Screw him. Took out my entire, and screw Felicity too while we're at it.
Yes.
That's where they came from. I want to touch on the comment you made about the ratings. And I just want to point out, I think that it's more important that they haven't lost an audience as opposed to rather grow the audience. And I do believe the audience has grown. However, the metrics by which we measure how an audience grows, this isn't the 90s. This isn't like even the 2000s, where everyone was so obsessed with the television ratings. There are so many different means by which, especially the younger generations, with that coveted 18 to 45 demographic, of which they get their programming. Whether it be through DVR, again, I'm not going to just stand here and pretend like I'm an expert on all these how the television industry works. But what's it called, Rick? It's something like there's a name for it where it's like because the streams, if somebody DVR something, it doesn't register within their as come up in ratings.
Right.
And then you also have to look at it. I forget. I don't know if you know the name of it or not. We could look it up perhaps. But there's a name for that goes into a completely separate category that's not included in this. Also, if and correct me if I'm wrong, isn't in some areas the Dynamite, is that available on Fight in other areas around the world?
Yes.
Or am I mistaken?
I believe so. Like Canada, I think.
Okay, so that's another air measurement that doesn't include the television ratings. The days of oh my gosh, WCW versus the WWF, they got a 4.5 in this thing, and they got a 4.1. We've gone well past that. We're into the era now of where it's like, okay, and again, going back to the HBO Max idea, if you get on something like that, then you can see, okay, this is the exact amount of streams, the exact amount of views that are happening. And the reason why I bring this up, and where I think is a point of contingency to show the growth for the brand, is the percentage of fans out of that. We'll say average, AEW average around 900,000 to a million viewers, correct?
Right.
Roughly. The percentage of those fans that buy AEW pay-per-view and merchandise is incredible.
Right.
It is such a high, it's much higher than the WWE. The WWE, even in their heyday, before the advent of the network, even if they're getting I don't know, we'll go with a 4.5 rating or whatever, they're only getting maybe at most 5 to 10% of those people plopping down the money to purchase it.
Right.
If that, I might be even be very generous with that number without having the data in front of me. But as far as AEW goes, I think who was it? Was it Cornette who I heard once said that it was like the greatest crowdfunding project that's continuously going on in professional wrestling, because I think the fans that are the fans of it, and quite frankly, I have been a fan from day one. My buddy once said to me, he goes, "You just want something other than the WWE?" And I go, "Yeah, I've wanted something other than the WWE since WCW closed, because I don't want just one option. If I'm going out to eat and I want to get a burger, I don't want McDonald's to be my only choice. Sure, there's a lot of it and everybody knows who it is, but it doesn't mean it's good. Occasionally they'll come out with something good, but you don't want to wait for those few and fleeting moments. Now with people that there's a hardcore fan base behind what AEW is doing, and they're willing to spend their money on that. I just think it's like television ratings, and it's not just pro wrestling, it's all across the board. It's like just the way that people consume content now has changed drastically. That's continuously changing. The amount of people that are looking on their phones watching, some people might be watching on a YouTube clip. Some people might be watching on, again, we talked about the fight streaming in Canada. So I think that the fact that they haven't lost and gone downhill is a good thing, and I think it's a very good thing. And I think I just think it's kind of, and I'm not accusing you of this, I just think it's an old way of thinking of that, like everything is live and die by the television ratings. And I get, because I can kind of hear the wheels in your head turning, going, well, but Jake, that's how advertisers come on board and all that stuff. And I completely agree with that. And the higher your ratings are, the more you attract advertisers and the more money you make into your brand. But at the same time, it's, we all see the annoying little ads that pop up on the YouTube clips where you want to watch a 2-minute video and you got a 30-second commercial and you sit there and you can skip it after 5. So I just think how things are measured in the entertainment industry have changed. So even in the past 5 years, really has changed so much, and that it can only benefit AEW moving forward as long as they take advantage of their rabid fan base. And I think it continues to grow. I have introduced plenty of people in my life to AEW, and them being like, oh, okay, you're going to love this one. I have a buddy of mine who runs our weekly pinball tournament. Texted me at 2 o'clock in the morning. The only thing the text said was, "Why the heck did you never tell me about Orange Cassidy?" And I text him back. I'm like, "Oh yes, the slacker who wrestles with his hands in his pockets and comes out to the Pixies. Why did I not tell you about this?" He's like, "I love it." And he just happened to come across and discover it. So that was someone who doesn't watch WWE, who just isn't interested in it. It comes across and he's like, "Yeah, it's like I watched it back in the day, but now it just comes across as as we said in our WWE breakdown, it's like it's too polished." This part of the pun on this one, but AEW comes across very much raw at times.
They do. And Orange Cassidy, we were talking about the 4 pillars of AEW before. One could say that the next coming of that, the 4 pillars after them, I would guess Orange Cassidy, Danhausen, Abaddon, and Fuego del Sol. There you go. There's your next 4.
License to print money right there.
That's right.
But that's the thing, though. If it's different and it gets people talking about it, my girlfriend loves Danhausen.
Yeah.
He's going out of the way. There's very few people on WWE that she's like, oh, Roman Reigns, that's it. That's the only one she goes out of the way to see. AEW, she's got Danhausen, anything involving MJF and Wardlow. She's like, okay, come on, we're gonna watch this. It's like, whoa, okay, that's kind of cool.
Well,
so obviously they're doing something that's working.
Yes, and I appreciate that she has always been a Keith Lee fan. I respected her the minute that I knew that we had that in common, of being a big Keith Lee fan. So she has very good taste in pro wrestling, no question about it. It's one of these things where, we talk about WWE versus them. We've talked about this before. I mean, AEW maybe risks watering it down with this Jericho storyline, but it has become essentially pro wrestling versus sports entertainment. And Jericho is trying to get the heat for being the enemy within doing sports entertainment in AEW. But again, you started to hear this around the time of All or Nothing, or not All or Nothing. I'm getting the names mixed up. All Out. I just combined Double or Nothing and All Out. At All Out, they seem to be starting the whole thing of like, oh, if you love great pro wrestling, this is the place for you. We got the best pro wrestling in the world. And they really do need to continue to lean into that. Now, as I said before, there's nothing but bad faith takes out there on Twitter, it seems like, as far as people being critical of it. And sadly enough, as somebody like Eric Bischoff, he has joined the chorus recently here. He hasn't liked the way that Tony Khan critiqued the dying days of WCW. And so he keeps talking about, oh, they'll never be mainstream the way that they are. They'll never be mainstream. I mean, and again, mainstream is easier said than done of how you get the opportunity to do this. And again, I don't really feel like it is an exclusionary kind of a thing, but there are some things that maybe they need to do better as far as explaining. I felt like for as much criticism as there was of CM Punk doing the old school ROH entrance back at Revolution, oh, people won't understand this. Excalibur was 10 out of 10 explaining it. I mean, I never really saw much of CM Punk in ROH. And I've watched that entrance a million times. It's emotional as hell seeing him go back to his roots. And I mean, CM Punk is fighting back tears doing this. Like, if hearing Excalibur explain it, like, you got it. And we need more of this kind of stuff. And to a certain extent, maybe that goes to the ratings because Tony Khan has said he studies the quarter hours a lot. I mean, again, he works in analytics for his dad's football and football teams, which, I could make the cheap shot joke of how much time is he really spending on that based on how they do on the field. But Tony Khan does know analytics, and he looks at the quarter hours, and that's where, again, they try to be, very guarded in terms of how they use it. They don't like to do video packages a lot, but I feel like video packages are necessary. And that's the whole thing, is that I think that Tony Khan has this sort of sense in his head. I think he hears Vince McMahon's voice in his head because Vince is so lowest common denominator about everything. Like it's every presentation is so dumbed down. Like how Pete Dunne is now like Butch the soccer hooligan. You know what I mean? Everything has to be so dumbed down, and he probably hears Vince's voice in his head like, "Get it, pal? He likes feet. He likes feet, pal. Get it? That's good shiznit, pal." Not every explanation is lowest common denominator. Like Keith Lee, after his debut, there should have been a thing, and it could have been a lot of, talking head stuff with Excalibur talking about this. Put up some of his indie footage and, like, why the fans start singing Bask in His Glory. And do some things like that. Like, don't just leave it to the eyes to observe stuff. And they leave a lot of the stuff to us to kind of figure out. And sometimes they do so erroneously. I mean, I saw somebody make this point recently on social media, and I observed it at the time. The first time, it might have been in the fall of 2019, that The Butcher and the Blade came out. I'd never heard of them. And the announcers are acting like it's the second coming of Hawk and Animal. Like, come on, man. Not everybody watched this, little podunk indie place that they were in. And I don't mean any offense to them in this, but I mean, explain who the heck they are. Explain what their deal is. They need to explain more. There needs to be more video packages on their programming because that's the kind of stuff that makes it more accessible to people. And that would take away a lot of the bad faith arguments out there as far as it's an exclusionary product. It's only meant for people who know and have watched all the indies and everything like that. You could suck a lot of oxygen out of that kind of crap, Jake, if they did a little bit more in the way of explaining.
I agree with you, but to the going back to the where it's an exclusionary product, before AEW, where were all of these indie darlings debuting at?
NXT, yes.
NXT was like the super indie fed.
Yes.
When Adam Cole, and I'm just going to use him, when Adam Cole, Kyle O'Reilly, and Bobby Fish debuted there, you didn't hear them say like, "Oh my God, they were in Ring of Honor" and all this stuff. Like, no, they just said, "Hey, these guys are here," and took they expected the audience to know it, I guess. But like every time the new signee would come in and they'd do the picture with Triple H and they'd be doing the Too Sweet or whatever, and then he'd sit in the crowd and the crowd would go nuts and be like, "Oh my God, that's so and so, they're back." They never were like, I'll use Drew McIntyre when he was in the audience. They didn't say like, "Oh my God, that used to be Drew McIntyre. He was in 3MB and then he went to Impact Wrestling and reinvented himself as Drew Galloway and it's totally turned." No, they just went, you know who it is. You know why they're here. So those people, I point this out because those same people that are criticizing AEW for this are the same ones that were praising NXT for doing the exact same thing back in the day. So it's like, I just think it's an example of there's too many trolls out there and too many people that will find things to complain about and be like, oh, well, this is like, not being done right. I agree that they need to have video packages and they need, once somebody comes in, develop more of, okay, well, who is this person?
Yes.
Why are they here? What is your reason other than, here, go out and have a match. Okay, and they have a match. And then maybe they win, maybe they lose, and that's it. It's like, I agree, there needs to be a lot more character development with various people there, but for people to be, but for the same trolls to be, knocking AEW for doing a very similar technique that NXT was doing that everybody loved, I just think that's, people trying to stir up stuff so that they can get ratings or to get clicks for whatever it is on their podcast or sound bites that are taken. You mentioned Bischoff. It's like everything for that. Bischoff's just doing that to promote his brand.
Right.
He's just working. He's just absolutely working to promote his brand so that people will be like, oh my God, you sure what so-and-so says? There's a funny thing, okay? On my social media feed, I'll see a thing, and it always annoys me because I don't know which one it is, one of the various 10,000 wrestling sites that, cover stuff. It'll say something like, WWE legend says this, and, about something in AEW. And 9 times out of 10, it's freaking Vince Russo, who's always, like, commenting on anything to keep his name relevant out there. And I'm just putting around like, nope, I'm not going to click on it because I know it's just Russo saying something, so people will talk about it. And it's like, no disrespect, whatever, everyone's got to make a living. But at the same time, it's like, man, you haven't been relevant in a very long time, and you're arguing back to a different time and a different era, and we're not in that time and era anymore. And your way of thinking just doesn't work.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The only thing I would say about what you said about NXT is I feel like, however, inadvertently, you were making my point for me, because within the WWE universe, NXT was the niche product. And indeed, that's why Vince never fully clutched it to his bosom, because it was a niche product, and that's what we loved about it. And it's a thing where AEW is trying to transcend that on a business level. So the whole, you know who they are, you know what they're doing, that kind of thing, I think it doesn't work as well. And again, I'm not giving credence to what the trolls are saying. And I'm not saying that they'll stop with all of the bad faith takes if they start explaining more and doing more character development and doing more background. But I think it's one of these things where it behooves them to really do it. And I'll tell you what, Jake, we're going to find out if they're capable of absorbing that lesson in the next month, because there needs to be wall-to-wall video packages, explanations, whatever, on the New Japan guys leading up to the Forbidden Door pay-per-view. Guys like me and you, we were all in, pardon the pun, the minute they announced it. Guys like us were salivating about this. But any of the quote-unquote casuals out there, if anybody just flips on and sees it there, they need to understand why the New Japan guys are a big deal. You need some talk about Okada and Naito and all these guys out there of like why they are so special and why you got to tune into this pay-per-view to see them. The next 30 days or so are going to be very, very vital in seeing if they're capable of absorbing this lesson, because they got to explain like never before to try to reach a little bit of a wider audience as to why this is such a special pay-per-view.
I agree with you. I agree with that, and also just to piggyback on it, they also have to convince people to be like, why they need to drop another $40 1 month after they just dropped $50 for the previous pay-per-view, being Double or Nothing coming up this weekend, and then pretty much a month later is the Forbidden Door pay-per-view, where it has to be like saying, hey, this is something that is special. This is something that, here are these guys. Go into the backstory of New Japan Pro Wrestling, how it has, been around for and have worked with, every promotion pretty much that has ever existed, as like, as far as their relationship going, how they've had how do I want to word this? How they've had a constant presence within the United States of America, the United States wrestling scene, and how they have worked with, the whatever the leading promotion was in America at the time. And right now, at this time, it is AEW. they can bring up the fact that, tie in, have sit-down interviews with the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega as they talk about their time in New Japan and how it made them become, the performers they are today. Various Brian Danielson is another great one right there, and we'll also at the same time use those guys to put over. Like I'm gonna tip my card on this one before we get to the. I'm gonna play my card. I'm sorry. I did what you did. I mixed two sayings together. I'm going to play my card. I personally feel the time is, as far as putting awareness on the brand and helping that growth we're talking about, put the World Championship on CM Punk.
Right.
He is much more known. He is much more of an established name. Casual fans from WWE back in the day, they know who he is. Even people who watched him, for better or worse, get his ass kicked in the UFC, know who he is. They know of him. He is a much bigger name. And to have the reason why I play that card now is because theoretically, then you could do the main event of CM Punk versus Okada, and having CM Punk talk about how great Okada is and how this is the dream match and the toughest challenge he's ever faced, to the point where using his mic skills and his verbiage to put over, this is like one of the biggest challenges I've ever personally had to face. I think you have to use the talent that's here as a mediator to put over these guys that, quite frankly, don't just come in and be like, oh my God, this is so-and-so, he's awesome. Okay, but why?
Right.
Let the people who are facing them tell the audience why this person that they're facing is going to be awesome. Why this is such a thing. Like, I heard one of the potential matches is Andrade against Naito, which I'm like, why? But both of them were they not founding members? Was it Los? Sorry,
Interglobalists or whatever.
Yes.
I'm
okay.
bungling
Your
it.
match is as good as mine. But if you tell the story of that, it's like, oh, okay, this match makes sense, and it gives you a reason to care about it.
Right.
Like, there's a huge backstory to that. I don't get the, going back to the criticism. I don't get people are like, oh, nobody cares about these guys did on, this indie fed or on the Independence in 2010 or whatever. It's like, well, in that case, you know what, dude? Nobody cares. Why should anybody who watched WWF in 1991 give a crap what Ric Flair did in Jim Crockett Promotions?
Right.
You can make the same argument.
Right. Well, except that the one thing would be that wrestling was bigger. I mean, coming out of the 80s, it was a boom period, at least in the WWF, and to a certain extent, the NWA before it headed south. So there was more people who knew who the wrestlers were, as opposed to today when wrestling isn't as mainstream. That's maybe the differentiation I would make there. Although I basically agree with your point, and I would say.
Real quick on that though, Rick, there was also far less forms of entertainment back then too.
Yes.
There's so much more options now, so much more.
Yes.
Back then it was very, very limited to what was available. We're in the infancy of cable television. The fact that they got on a 15.2 rating, whatever it was on NBC, highest rated professional wrestling show of all time is still Hogan versus Andre, because there was nothing else to do.
Right. I would agree with that. The other thing is too. The most obvious part of this with the tie-in with Forbidden Door is that with New Japan, I mean, there's no All Elite Wrestling, at least the form that it's in, without New Japan and the Bullet Club. I mean, this came out of the Bullet Club. What is the Elite the elite of? The elite of the Bullet Club. And this is where everything flows out of it. And the success of the Bullet Club, which again, when you look at Hot Topic with the shirts and everything like that, that was the biggest movement post WCW that we'd really seen in the United States, and that's what kind of set the table. That was some of the seeds of what we're seeing, with the formation of AEW subsequently, the All-In pay-per-view, and then everything that came thereafter. But Tony Khan needs to be he needs to be ready to acknowledge all of the history that's there, and I think it's a promising sign. The fact that the Bullet Club and Jay White were a central part of the announcement of Forbidden Door was a good sign. What I didn't like was, if you remember a couple months back when Jay White did the one appearance on Dynamite, remember it was when Tony Khan kind of screwed up and he mentioned there was a debuting wrestler coming in and the Forbidden Door, and he sort of meant both of those things for Keith Lee, but he realized when fans started tweeting at him that Keith Lee didn't fit the Forbidden Door, He's like, oh crap, I got to go get somebody to walk through the Forbidden Door, and he got Jay White. I don't remember a single freaking reference to Bullet Club in Jay White's segment. It was like, oh, this guy's so great. He's one of the great guys from New Japan. Oh, and I don't think they ever said Bullet Club once, or said any of the specific things about what makes him so great and what makes him one of the biggest stars out there. And I can't help but wonder, you go back to about this time last year, when Kenny Omega was doing the belt collector thing, and he had that match coming up in Impact, the unification match with Rich Swann for both the TNA and Impact World titles, which was weird that they had both of them there at that time. And like the week of the pay-per-view, there was the briefest cursory mention on AEW television, like just very, very brief. And somebody asked Tony Khan about it later, and he was like, hey, look, man, no offense, but it's not my job to sell Impact's pay-per-views for him. And I'm looking at this like, that is being penny wise, pound foolish, because you have to tell the story. Because if Kenny Omega is going to be walking out on your TV with these 2 extra belts, if you haven't done anybody to prepare anybody for that, for him coming out with the 2 extra belts, it's just like, oh, Kenny Omega's got 2 more belts than he did last week. I felt like at the time, Tony Khan was missing the point of that, because yes, Impact was benefiting a lot from the arrangement. Their ratings were way up, their buy rates were way up, everything like this. But you have to fully commit to whatever you're doing without always saying what's in it for me. And I do think Tony Khan is growing past that at this point. I'm seeing good signs of it in the relationship with New Japan. But it's a thing where he can't be afraid to have his announcers go out there and talk about Bullet Club 60 times an hour without having a thought in his head that says, hey, wait a minute, I'm not making a cut off of their t-shirts. You know what I mean? It's got to be one of these things where it's not a matter of being selfless. It's a matter of like you tell the entire story so that you can benefit from it as the story unfolds, so people are more invested in the full story. And that's, like I said, I think Tony Khan is showing signs of having grown past where he was a year ago on that with Impact. I truly hope that's the case anyways.
No, I agree with you, because you have to go into that story, like you said. I mean, without Bullet Club, there is no elite wrestling.
Right.
And that's the story that needs to be told. That that from these guys from the ashes, and the interesting about that too, Bullet Club is now in almost every federation.
Yeah.
You look at it, every promotion.
Yeah.
Like when on Monday Night Raw, when AJ Styles and Finn Balor did up the 2 Sweet, it wasn't because they were in the NWO. It was a reference to them still being in Bullet Club.
Right.
It's like they're like, hey, we're still in Bullet Club. They're making it. They can't say it, but they're in Bullet Club. That's what that is. Then to go back to what you said about Jay White, I'm pretty sure Adam Cole mentioned something about when he debuted about Bullet.
Maybe.
I think he said briefly, not really going into it, but it was like, okay, and now you've got Impact's running strong with the Bullet Club on their show.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely love to see some kind of, you want to put these guys together, do the confrontation of Bullet Club versus the Elite.
Absolutely.
Tell that story of being like, you have the member of Bullet Club, you can have Jay White leading the Bullet Club and being like, you guys left us. You guys abandoned all of us for yourselves.
That's true.
There's a whole story that's right there. It's like, if it wasn't for us, like you guys built this, and then you guys ran off for higher, for greener pastures. Meanwhile, we're the ones keeping everything alive and going. That is the foundation for every single thing that you have here. So, and I guess, going back to Jay White, it's being like, if it wasn't for us, none of this exists.
Yes, and quite frankly, I could see that being the case. I think Jay White is going to be somebody that's going to be instrumental down the road, because they've already been teasing it when Omega comes back, that it looks like it might be Jay White with Adam Cole and Red Dragon against the Bucks and Kenny, and then maybe that's the reunion with Hangman Page. But the other thing is, when we talked about this, when we talked about AEW late last summer, was I said at the time, they need to do trios titles. And Tony Khan has basically confirmed there will be trios titles. He basically said, we're just waiting on Omega, which tells me that that's going to be centered around the breakup of the Super Elite. But it's a thing here where, I mean, there are so many great factions, and, we'll talk about this a little bit more once we get into the pay-per-view, but between the 2 sub-factions of the Elite, It looks like the Pinnacle is gone, although they have yet to do the final blow off between FTR and MJF. Maybe that's coming at some point. But basically, with the Jericho Appreciation Society, the Blackpool Combat Club, on and on and on it goes, plus the very deep roster of tag teams. Just have the tag teams align with another wrestler. Best Friends is basically a stable unto itself. Best Friends / Roppongi Vice / whatever. I mean, they have the depth out there to really treat those trios titles like something very, very valuable, and that will give everybody out there one more thing to go for that will be very valued and a good use of TV time.
And it would give people reason to have all of these groups on TV.
Yes.
And something to go after and something to be competing for. Because you're saying Dark Order is the name that popped into my head.
Dark Order.
Triangle, another one popped into my head
Yep.
while you were talking about that. The House of Black, you mentioned them, but there's and then various Team Taz. I mean, if once they separate because they want to put Hook back in with them, but there's so many different options of guys that it'll give them something, and it'll justify why we're having all of these trios or 6-man tag team matches that are going on, and it'll add just another level of intrigue. And my question is, and it goes back to the very beginning of our conversation about Ring of Honor, who also has the trios tag team titles. Do you just wipe those out, or do you flip those, or you have it where they can go against each other? Maybe one day at some point do a Super Bowl of wrestling or something that Jim Ross had the idea of when Jim Crockett bought the UWF way back in the day. Because if you look at it, like a lot of their titles kind of match up against each other, where you could make while growing one brand, you could also subsequently have the other brand piggyback off of it. But going back to where giving all of these guys something to shoot for. Just a thought.
Dare I say it, kind of like brand warfare at the Survivor Series? Is that what you're tapping into?
Yeah, kind of, but not really, because
Okay.
that's just manufactured in BS.
Yes, absolutely.
It's like, I wear a blue shirt now because I got traded here last week. Who cares? Nobody cares. It's like, man, I can't wait for this year's Survivor Series when Roman wrestles himself.
Yes, that will be absolutely amazing if he bothers to even be on the pay-per-view. Well, yes, and you just brought it full circle there to the ROH stuff. That was the extent of my macro-level thoughts. Any other macro-level thoughts for the state of ROH for you, Jake Digman?
Are you mean the state of AEW?
AEW, my bad.
No, I'm excited. Like our conversation last time, I'm excited to see where things are going moving forward. I think they're on the right trajectory. I think hopefully the last time their contract came up for renewal, I do believe they were given more money, correct?
Yes.
And hopefully if they show that they can be consistent and steady and in brand awareness, hopefully they because let's face it, the name of the game right now is in your television rights and the amount of money you get from that, because it's not like they're making all their money off of the live event feeds. And hopefully, in a year from now, when we revisit this, if we haven't done so sooner, hopefully by then, someone has come up with some kind of a streaming deal with HBO Max, and then you and I will be sitting there talking about, finding that classic ROH match that we can watch from 2006 on HBO Max, which is being like, what? That's a sentence that would have been said 3 years ago. And I almost forgot. Speaking of ROH, this is an inside baseball just for you, my friend. When the CM Punk came out for his entrance against MJF, and he did his old school ROH entrance. In the back, I was cheering. I was part of the fun. I was marking out. However, in my head, the person who I saw the most was the ghost of Kyle Ross marking out, and he's not even dead. I just, for some reason, just pictured Kyle Ross somewhere, just like crying, going like 2007 Kyle Ross, be like, "This is the greatest day of my life."
That actually has the ring of truth to it. I can understand why you had that mental image. That just makes it even better, But yeah, no.
It was the first person I thought of when I saw it. I was like, I know one person who's going to appreciate this.
Yes. Few have ever cherished the ROH promotion like Kyle Ross, a truly, truly devoted fan of theirs, to be sure.